Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our very good friends Sam Clement and Courtney Trust. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hello.
I'm doing fantastic, but you know something? I'm feeling a little bit lighter in the wallet for a lot of different reasons, but part of it is because, man, I came back from Virginia driving a U-Haul, and when I filled up that tank the first time, it was $90. And then I had to fill partially back up again when I dropped it off last night, and it was another $55. That is a lot of money on gasoline. It's even a heck of a lot more than what John, my son, sent to me last week. He showed me a picture of how much it cost to fill up his car, $54.
Yeah.
I mean, that's real inflation. That's really hitting the pocketbook. I mean, Sam, what are you thinking about inflation? What's going on here?
Well, that part of it's hard to ignore. I mean, I drive a pickup truck, and that's a 26-gallon tank, and you're right. Seeing gas prices now over $3.30 a gallon here in Alabama, which is typically one of the lower gas price states, that already is pretty expensive. I can't even imagine what some of the states, especially in Gavin Newsom's California, upwards of $8 a gallon.
And earlier this week, a client called me out on it. I said, but I'm telling you the truth. Earlier this week, I was going to make some chicken salad. Sam makes chicken salad, I make chicken salad, and I went to the grocery store to buy some Duke's mayo, best mayo around. Well, store-bought variety, of course. And it was so expensive, Courtney. I wasn't going to pay $6 for a jar of Duke's. So I settled for blue plate mayonnaise. What do you think about that?
Oh, nasty. I bet it made a difference.
It sure did. It was delicious because I knew I was paying less. But here we are. Beth and I are empty nesters. I mean, Courtney, here you are. You're almost a little old lady who lives in a shoe. I mean,
yes.
truthfully, except that, you're married and happily. But have you seen prices eating away at your budget with gasoline and groceries and daycare and all that stuff?
For sure. I think for me, I don't really pay as much attention, or I don't necessarily always correlate the price of gas with inflation, because I feel like there are other factors that can cause gas to go up and down. So it might be, something going on with an oil rig or distribution issues, but that fluctuates. So I have seen it go up, and yes, that affects taking people to practice and all the driving that I have to do. And unfortunately, I don't drive a cool pickup truck. I drive a nice little minivan.
Well, you didn't have to say that.
Yeah, so, leaning into just being a mother. But definitely, I feel like what I've seen more of is when it comes to daycare and childcare in general, having to pay not just the daycare a higher percentage for reduced hours because they can't get workers, but also even trying to get a babysitter for the weekend. College students don't want to work unless it's a good bit of money, because everyone's giving signing bonuses and higher hourly rates. So would they rather scoop ice cream and get the benefits of that, or watch my children, which you would think, of course, watch my children, but that's not always the case for everyone. So,
I think I might rather scoop ice cream. But Courtney, Courtney's bringing up a pretty good point. Oil goes up and down, hurricanes in the Gulf, and all that stuff. But where did all the people go? Do you think this is a part of what's going on with inflation, just lack of people out there working?
Well, I think there's a lot of issues going on, and I think it's important to look at it from a country-by-country aspect, because I think all different countries are experiencing different issues.
Well, they have different monetary and fiscal policies, too,
right? The big ones have pretty similar monetary policy goals lately.
Which is essentially flooding their systems with cash.
Yeah, changing deposits for, So it's pretty, it's pretty similar what the EU's doing to what we're doing. So I think what's important is looking at the infrastructure to me. That is what I circle in on as being the biggest issue that we're experiencing with inflation, because we're experiencing a record boom in consumer demand for goods. Consumer wages are going up, especially on the low end. The stock market's at an all-time high. There's a lot of good things going on right now, and we're just not able to get goods where they need to go.
So is it a demand issue or a supply issue with the surging prices, or is it a combination of the two?
Well, it's kind of one and the same, I think. I think it's a record amount of demand that we're experiencing here, and we're seeing how awful our infrastructure is. Look at this $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. There's over $250 billion worth of it going to clean energy, something that has a 30, 40-year plus time horizon before we fully implement that.
40 years from now, I'll probably be in the grave.
17
or in the air. One or the other.
17 billion is what is
What?
dedicated to our ports, to upgrading our ports.
Well, Sam, you and I talked about this. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach account for 50% of our trade with Asia, at least in imports and exports too. And those, I've read some crazy study by a group called IHS or something on those lines in conjunction with the World Bank. And it said that Los Angeles was the 328th most efficient port out of 351 in the survey, and Long Beach was 331st most efficient out of, again, those 351. So our two most important ports in terms of goods trade with Asia are some of the least efficient ports in the country. How, with the surge in demand and with everything that's going on with California's COVID laws and various regulations, this surge in demand certainly has caused massive bottlenecks, which cause supply chain issues throughout the country.
Well, and that's exactly it, and it's getting worse. I mean, people say it's going to get better, and I'll stand by that. I think it will get better, but you look at the ports lining up. I mean, we can go on our Bloomberg terminal and see the amount of ships waiting outside LA and Long Beach, and it's getting worse still. But it's hard for, I think, someone to argue if I said higher port throughput wouldn't lead to lower inflation. If we are able to get goods through where they need to go quicker, that wouldn't eliminate a lot of the inflation that we're experiencing here.
Now, Courtney, is this the type of stuff that you tell your kids when you're driving them around, you're looking in the rearview mirror like my father did when Brooke and I, my sister, were fighting in the back seat, and you're looking in the rearview mirror, you're saying, you kids better calm down because there's supply chain issues with the Port of Los Angeles.
And we really talk about world peace, really. We actually do have some. My oldest is actually interested in and will occasionally ask questions about the news. So we hit on some of it, but his probably is more of interesting, or he's more interested in the ships than actually the supply chain issue. I guess my question, and what I'm still struggling with a little bit in understanding this, is we're saying that there's a surge in demand. Mm-hmm. Like, why is there a surge of demand? Like, is it like psychological, where people were so frantic during the pandemic of not being able to get things because, manufacturer locations were shut down because of COVID, or is it an influx of cash because of, the government's assistance? Why is there such a demand out there?
Well,
Go ahead.
I think it's several parts. I think we've hit on a few of them. I mean, I think the rapid labor market recovery. We lost more jobs than we did in 2008, and we've already recovered a vast sum of them. And we've talked previously about some of those jobs not coming back. However, you multiply that with the surge in household wealth and rapid wage gains, especially on the low end, and added consumer confidence. People feel good about their prospects going forward. I mean, and it's hard not to, especially when you see the amount of places that are hiring and throwing out those bonuses. Why wouldn't you be confident about what you can get going forward? And if that's the case, when people get more confident, that's economics 101, that people go out and spend more and save less.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, last year, I think in the pandemic, the worst part of the pandemic year, 2020, if I'm not mistaken, I think financial markets and home equity, all that stuff, household wealth went up some $13.5 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, which is a ton of money. And my gain on that was just a mere fraction of that. I mean, a very small fraction of that. But so, Courtney, I think when people, and while they don't necessarily base their monthly budget on what their 401k is doing, what their Zillow value of their house is or whatnot, it does make them a little bit more confident to say, I'll go ahead and purchase something a little bit ahead of time. Replace the 55-inch set with the 65-inch set that you've been wanting for a while. So the monthly budget, people haven't changed terribly much, but it's sort of that kind of one-up type deal. That's my estimation. And so the wealthiest got a bunch of balance sheet wealth, and Sam hit the nail on the head. Lower skilled workers are starting to see a little bit of power, I guess, pricing power, in order to come back to work. They're signing bonuses, higher hourly wages, because, there's the demand for them. Like you said, your college students won't come work probably unless it's about $20 an hour, maybe a little bit more. And so that makes for a pretty expensive night out.
It sure does.
Say you and your husband want to go to the movies. You're dropping how much, whatever, at the movie. That's $100 night. And,
easily.
all you've done is just go to the movie theater. So, I mean, there's inflation around.
And I think you can't discount, too, what lower rates have done, especially to housing prices. I mean, I think there's stats on how many people have refinanced and are now under 3.5% or so. I mean, a lot of people under 3. That's extra wiggle room in the budget, too, to go out and spend on goods that are we're seeing in these ports and causing some of the issues in the ports. Is you get a couple extra $100 a month from refinancing, that means you can go out and spend a couple $100 more a month on things that are being shipped into the country.
Or being shipped into the country, but not being moved off the docks.
Sitting at the dock.
Well, I mean, I think you just see how mismanaged some of these ports are when you see some of the inland zones in Long Beach were only allowed to stack these containers too high, and it wasn't a safety thing. It wasn't a
It was a visual pollution.
It was a not in my backyard regulation is what they wanted. They didn't want the ugly look of containers being several high. So therefore, trucks are sitting there with containers still on their chassis. They can't get off to go then get more containers out of the ports, and that's a large part of the issue.
So if containers aren't stacking up, but if containers are sitting at the ports in California, then that means there are fewer containers for other ports and what have you. Because if I'm not mistaken, I mean, Sam, maybe my eyeballs deceived me, which is often the case. You know, last week we were down in South Alabama. We took a look at the port of Alabama Port down in Mobile. It did not seem to be groaning with activity.
No, and we were talking about that on the way back. So I got on the terminal and looked at the port of Mobile and even looked at all the ships coming to the port of Mobile, and it didn't look like they were having nearly the issue that the port of Long Beach was having and the port of Los Angeles.
So maybe some of this inflation is kind of manufactured in California.
You know, they've said, Milton Friedman used to say that inflation was a monetary phenomenon, that it could only be caused by essentially the Federal Reserve. I think we're starting to see it's not just the Federal Reserve, it's also the federal government and really the state government and local governments and just governments in general that are causing the inflation, because I don't think you're seeing this level of inflation in other parts of the globe. I mean, Eurozone inflation still sitting around 2%. Japan, which is its own story, but they're still at 0.2%.
Yeah.
So this is something happening uniquely in America.
And it seems like there might be a variety of causes for it.
Yeah.
Supply chain disruptions, lack of supply of workers, pushing unit labor costs up, and then Sam, all of it, I mean, got a lot of cash that's kind of floating about, with the Federal Reserve keeping its foot on the pedal, and with the Congress getting ready to drop 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, whatever Sinema and Manchin ultimately decide it's going to be. That's money with $1 trillion.
Yeah.
And that's a ton of money that's just going to be dumped into the economy over the next several years.
And all that money, what we've talked about with what the Federal Reserve done, a lot of how quickly the recovery is unfolded is inarguably to me a good thing. I mean, it's hard for me to argue that there hasn't been a lot of benefits that have come from this, and it's hard for me to point towards the surging demand that we're seeing being a bad thing in this country. I think that just continues to point towards this demand is not being able to be filled properly. I mean, we've talked about supply and demand curves, and when those two don't line up, that's where issues come. There's a lot of demand, and there's just not a lot of supply.
Courtney, if I'm hearing Sam correctly, and I think I am, he's telling me that the 48 hours I spent filling up that 10-foot U-Haul this past weekend, I should just shut up and take it.
I think that's what Joe Biden says.
Careful
I'm not sure
now.
about that. Well, I keep going back to what does this mean for maybe not us, but for the average worker, the average blue-collar worker? If they're getting paid more, they're getting signing bonuses to go to work, and then we're saying that the cost of goods is now increasing. What Sam, did you say 5.4% is kind of what we have right now with inflation. What does that actually, does it kind of come out in the wash?
Well, of course it does. I mean, in a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, the thing is, if my wages are growing faster than the rate of inflation, what do I care? I mean,
Right.
if inflation's running 20%, but I'm getting paid 30% more each year, so what? I mean, truthfully, I mean, that's people go, oh, come on, but that's just the way it is. It's when wages are growing 4%, which is an awesome year for the average American worker, and prices are going up 6%. That's when purchasing power declines. So, it's as long as the wage increases keep the purchasing power at least even keel to inflation, the average worker won't feel much.
Well, so do y'all, when you're looking at 2022, do you think that people won't be as confident in their buying power based off of inflation for this year?
The most recent consumer board's confidence level would suggest that people feel pretty good, and I think they're feeling good about watching the stock market, who hasn't gone on to Zillow or Trulia?
Yes, something like that.
Something like that. Gone to one of those pages and take a look at their housing value. We all do that type of stuff, and so people probably feel pretty good about things. And so we have all noticed the rising increase in inflation. However, it hasn't, for all the increases in inflation, it hasn't been the news story that I think it would have been 3 or 4 years ago, because we are seeing a massive increase in economic activity. We have seen a massive increase in household wealth. And perhaps we are believing what Jay Powell says. It's transitory.
Well,
Yes.
if we're saying, and I'm saying this at least, that a lot of this is government caused inflation, that kind of thing typically is going to be transitory. It's not something that it's easy to see how we fix some of these issues that are causing some of this inflation.
Some of this begs the question to me. Because we're seeing a lot of these supply chain bottlenecks, going back to what you're talking about, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach in particular, but there's Oakland's jammed up, and there's another one out in California that's also jammed up. Is because we've seen such supply chain distributions with the inefficiency largely of the California ports, is our trade with Asia and therefore the efficiency of the California ports too important to be left solely to the whims of local bureaucrats in Long Beach, Los Angeles, and Sacramento?
I'd be fine bringing the National Guard in right now and
my
using it.
word.
I'm serious. It's an issue for our country, and they have resources. I don't think that's crazy to bring in National Guard to continue to.
Well, you don't think the state should have its own autonomy, that they need to handle their own issues, even though it's
It's
affecting
causing
the entire country?
everybody else issues. This is not just an issue impacting the people that voted for Gavin Newsom.
Right.
What do you think about that, Courtney?
I don't like the federal government getting involved in state issues, and I get that it's an infrastructure and it's specific. Where I guess wasn't it? Didn't you say, I think our last podcast, that they had extended the hours of the port to be open 24 hours?
Yeah.
And that was like a federal government decision.
And they allowed the city of Long Beach, I think it was, allowed those 2 stacked containers outside of the port itself to now be stacked up to 4 to sometimes 5 tall. So
Wow.
Wow, that's pretty nice. It's nice of them.
it is nice of them.
Not for the people that have a terrible view, but
not in my backyard.
hopefully they'll get over it for a little
I
bit.
don't imagine the view, if you live close to the port, is really all that awesome anyhow. It's probably pretty industrial, I think.
Yeah, at least
what-
you can
that's
see
what I think.
water.
Yeah, maybe, but not with all those ships.
Not
and
with
things.
5 containers.
Crowded with ships. Well, guys, here we are getting close to the end of Trading Perspectives this week, and I'm not sure we traded perspectives, but I think we're all feeling inflation a little bit differently. So Beth and our empty nesters, I'm probably seeing a little bit more at the grocery store and at the tank. Courtney's seeing in childcare, and Sam's just living the dream.
Living the dream.
Them being a newlywed,
Yeah.
and he's not even noticing anything
No,
like
he
that because
doesn't, no.
stars are in his eyes and candy cane hearts and all that
Except
stuff.
when
I
I'm
don't know
filling
what the
my
candy cane
truck
heart
up.
is.
Yes, his truck. He seems like the guy.
He lives a mile and a half away from the office. You fill up your truck
Once a month.
Yeah.
something like that. So I'm not sure if we traded perspectives, but it's been fun seeing how inflation has impacted all of us. So guys, we always like hearing from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please by all means let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, by all means, also go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab. And Sam, before we leave, I forgot to mention something.
Yeah,
You know what I forgot to mention?
I do know what you forgot.
And what was that?
Our inflation gauge.
That's right. Gang, we are starting an inflation gauge here at Oakworth Capital Bank. We're going to track high-end items, and then we're going to track low-end items to see whether or not the cost of living it up is going faster, is growing faster than the cost of living. So we're building the data out, and that's probably going to be going live first part of next month.
Yeah, getting some interesting data already.
What do you think about that, Courtney?
I'm excited to see it. That'll affect me for sure.
All right. Y'all take care.